I remember the exact moment my life split in two. It wasn't when they read the verdict, or when the cell door closed for the first time, or even when I saw Marcus's body on the floor of our shared office. It was earlier than all of that. It was the moment I trusted someone I shouldn't have, and I didn't even know it yet. My name is Rachel Collier, and for 17 years I was prisoner number 84,729 at Clearwater Correctional Facility for Women. Before that, I was a forensic accountant with my own consulting firm in Minneapolis. I had a brownstone in Linden Hills, a car I'd paid off, and a business partner named Marcus Webb, who I'd known since graduate school. We weren't friends exactly, but we were good together professionally. He handled client relations, I handled the numbers. Clean, efficient, profitable. Marcus died on a Tuesday in October, and by Friday I was in custody. The prosecution's case was elegant in its simplicity. They said I'd discovered Marcus was embezzling from our clients and confronted him. They said we argued. They said I struck him with a glass paperweight, that he fell and hit his head on the corner of his desk, that I panicked and staged it to look like a robbery. They had a witness who claimed to have heard us fighting the night before. They had my fingerprints on the paperweight, which made sense because it sat on the shared conference table and I touched it every single day. They had my key card showing I'd entered the building at 6:47 that morning, 20 minutes before our receptionist arrived and found Marcus's body. What they didn't have was motive that made any sense, because Marcus wasn't embezzling anything. Our books were clean. I'd just audited them myself the month before. But they had something better than motive. They had Amanda Reese. Amanda was our office manager, 26 years old, competent, pleasant, always early, always organized. She'd been with us for 3 years. She testified that she'd overheard Marcus and me arguing violently in his office 2 nights before his death. She said she'd heard me shout that I'd make him pay, that I'd ruin him. She said she'd seen me crying in the bathroom afterward, that I'd told her I'd discovered something terrible about Marcus, but I couldn't talk about it yet. She said all of this under oath, with tears in her eyes looking straight at the jury. None of it happened. I'd never argued with Marcus. I'd never cried in that bathroom. I'd never confided anything to Amanda about Marcus because there was nothing to confide. But Amanda was young and sympathetic, and she cried at exactly the right moments. And my attorney was 63 years old and kept calling me Michelle during cross-examination. The forensic evidence was muddy. The medical examiner testified that Marcus died from blunt force trauma consistent with a fall, but couldn't definitively say whether he'd been pushed or struck first. The paperweight had my prints, but also smudged partials that couldn't be identified. The angle of the head wound was inconclusive. Everything was inconclusive except Amanda's testimony, and apparently that was enough. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. When they came back, I watched the forewoman's face, and I already knew. You can see it in people's eyes when they've decided you're capable of violence. They look at you differently. They look through you. Guilty on all counts. I got 25 years to life. The first year inside, I was still fighting. I filed appeals. I wrote letters to advocacy groups, journalists, anyone who might listen. I kept detailed notes about Amanda, about the timeline, about every inconsistency I could remember from the trial. I was certain someone would see it. Someone would understand that I was telling the truth. But here's what I learned about the truth in prison. It doesn't matter unless someone believes it, and no one believes the person who's already been convicted. You become a liar by default. Every protestation of innocence sounds the same as every other prisoner's story. Everyone in here is innocent, they say. Everyone was framed. Everyone had bad representation. After the first year, something in me went quiet. I stopped writing letters. I stopped filing motions. I followed the routine because routine was the only thing that separated the days from each other. I worked in the library. I read everything they had, which wasn't much, but I read it anyway. I learned to sleep through noise. I learned to eat food that had no taste. I learned to make my face blank when other women talked about their children, their families, their lives outside. I had no one. My parents were dead. I'd been an only child. I'd dated, but never seriously. Never anyone who would wait 17 years. Marcus had been my closest professional relationship, and he was gone. My friends from graduate school sent a few letters in the beginning, awkward and tentative, then nothing. Amanda never visited, of course. Why would she? What I thought about during those years was the detail, the tiny detail I must have missed. Because someone who plans a murder doesn't leave that many holes in the story. The embezzlement that never existed, the argument that never happened, the motive that made no sense. It was too loose, too rushed, which meant either it was a crime of passion, which the evidence didn't support, or it was staged poorly by someone who didn't expect to have to explain it. But explaining it was Amanda's job, and she'd done it beautifully. I thought about her testimony 1,000 times, 10,000 times. I replayed every word she'd said on that stand. I tried to find the crack in it, the place where the lie showed through. But she'd been so specific. The date, the time, the words she claimed to have heard. She'd even described what I was wearing, a navy blue suit I actually did own. She'd layered in enough truth to make the lies invisible. And then, somewhere around year 9, I realized what I should have seen from the beginning. She knew what I was wearing because she'd watched me. She knew the layout of our office because she worked there. She knew Marcus's schedule, his habits, his routines. She had keys. She had access. She had opportunity. But she had no motive either, as far as I knew. Unless there was something I'd never seen. Some connection between Amanda and Marcus I'd never noticed. Some reason she'd want him dead and me in prison for it. I couldn't investigate from inside. I had no resources, no contacts, no way to pull financial records or phone logs or anything else that might show a connection. All I could do was remember, and think, and wait. Waiting is a skill you learn in prison. You learn to wait without hope, because hope is more painful than emptiness. You learn to move through years the way other people move through days. You learn that the person you were before doesn't exist anymore, and the person you're becoming is shaped by concrete and steel and silence. I turned 43 in prison, then 45, then 50. I stopped thinking about Amanda. I stopped thinking about the case. I stopped thinking about justice because justice was a fantasy for people on the outside. Inside, there was only time and the slow erosion of everything you used to be. And then, in my 17th year, a lawyer named David Park requested to see me. He was young, maybe 30, with dark-rimmed glasses and a messenger bag covered in pins from law school organizations. He sat across from me in the visiting room and opened a laptop that looked too expensive for a public defender, which is what I assumed he was. He said, "Ms. Collier, my name is David Park. I work with the Midwest Innocence Initiative. I've been reviewing your case file, and I think there's something wrong with your conviction." I didn't react. I'd heard versions of this before, from well-meaning advocates who ultimately went away when the appeals failed. I just looked at him and waited. He said, "I need to ask you about the forensic report from the crime scene, specifically the blood spatter analysis." I blinked. In 17 years, no one had mentioned blood spatter. He turned his laptop toward me. On the screen was a photograph from the crime scene, Marcus's office, taken from the doorway. You could see his desk, the overturned chair, the dark stain on the carpet where he'd lain. I'd seen this photograph at trial. It had been entered as evidence, shown to the jury, used to build the story of my violence. David zoomed in on a section of the wall behind Marcus's desk near the window. There were small reddish-brown spots, barely visible, scattered in a fine mist pattern. He said, "The original analysis identified this as impact spatter consistent with blunt force trauma. It was part of the prosecution's evidence that Marcus was struck while standing near his desk. But look at the distribution pattern." I looked. The droplets were high on the wall, above where Marcus's head would have been even if he'd been standing at full height. David said, "This pattern is more consistent with cast-off from a secondary impact, meaning someone struck him more than once, with an object that was swung in an arc. The prosecution used it to support their theory that you hit him with the paperweight, but they misread the spatter mechanics. This isn't impact spatter. It's cast off from a weapon being raised and swung again. I stared at the screen. So? So it means whoever killed Marcus didn't just push him or strike him once in a struggle. They hit him, then raised the weapon and hit him again. That's not manslaughter. That's not a confrontation gone wrong. That's intentional. The prosecution said I was angry, that I struck him in anger. But you didn't, David said quietly. Did you? It wasn't a question. I shook my head. No. The second issue, David continued, is that the paperweight they said you used had your fingerprints but no blood trace. The prosecution argued you'd wiped it clean, but if you'd wiped it clean, you would have wiped the prints too. And if the paperweight was the murder weapon, used with enough force to create this kind of cast-off pattern, there should be microscopic blood residue in the decorative grooves on the glass. The forensic team tested it. Nothing. My heart was beating faster now, something I hadn't felt in years. Then what was the weapon? I don't know yet, but I know it wasn't the paperweight. And I know the spatter analysis was either incompetent or deliberately misrepresented. I've had 2 independent experts review these photos. Both agree the original analysis was wrong. I sat back in my chair. 17 years. Someone had looked at this photograph for maybe 90 seconds and seen something that could have changed everything. And no one had seen it. Not my lawyer. Not the appeals court. No one. I said, "Why now? Why are you looking at this now?" David hesitated. Because Amanda Reese tried to hire our firm last month. The air in the room changed. She's being sued, he continued, by a former business associate. Civil litigation, breach of contract. When I saw her name, I recognized it from a database search I'd been running on forensic cases with problematic witness testimony. I pulled your file. I started reading. And then I saw the spatter analysis. And I knew. What does Amanda do now? I asked. My voice sounded strange, distant. She owns a corporate consulting firm in Chicago, very successful apparently. She's built quite a reputation, specializes in helping companies recover from internal fraud. The irony was so sharp it could cut. I said, she framed me. David nodded slowly. I think so, but I need to prove it. And to do that, I need your help remembering everything you can about her, about Marcus, about the firm. Anything that might show a connection or a motive. So I remembered. I told him about Amanda's efficiency, her access, her keys. I told him about the clients Marcus and I shared, the accounts we managed, the money we moved. I told him about the weeks before Marcus died, trying to recall anything unusual, any interaction with Amanda that seemed off. And then I remembered something I'd buried for 17 years. 3 weeks before Marcus was killed, we'd taken on a new client, a private equity firm called Heron Capital. Marcus had brought them in, said they needed a full audit of a company they were acquiring. It was a big contract, 6 figures, and Marcus was excited. He'd handled the initial meetings himself. Amanda had prepared the paperwork. I told David this, and I watched his eyes sharpen behind his glasses. He said, "Do you remember the name of the company Heron Capital was acquiring?" I closed my eyes. Thought. Westfield something. Westfield Tech? Westfield Medical? I'll find it, David said. He was already typing. It took him 4 months. 4 months of digging through corporate records, financial filings, shell companies, and acquisition documents that had been buried in the kind of legal complexity that only exists to hide things. But David was patient, and he was smart, and he found it. Heron Capital had been a shell. The company they were supposedly acquiring didn't exist. The whole deal was a fabrication designed to move money through our firm's accounts. Money that would be laundered through the audit process and disappear into untraceable offshore holdings. And Amanda Reese had been one of the founding partners of Heron Capital, hidden behind 3 layers of LLC registrations. Marcus must have found out. He must have seen something in the paperwork, asked the wrong question, started looking too closely, and Amanda had killed him before he could expose her. Framing me had been efficient. The business partner, The person with access. The person who'd been there that morning. She'd testified against me to make sure the investigation never looked any further. And then she'd dissolved Heron Capital, taken her money, and built a new life in Chicago while I rotted in a cell. David filed for exoneration based on the blood spatter analysis and the new evidence of Amanda's financial motive. It took another 8 months for the courts to move. 8 months of waiting in a cell while lawyers argued and judges reviewed, and the system that had crushed me slowly, reluctantly began to admit it had been wrong. I was released on a Tuesday in March, 17 years and 5 months after my conviction. They gave me a check for $47, the balance of my prison account. They gave me the clothes I'd been wearing when I was arrested, which no longer fit. They gave me a bus voucher and an apology from a junior prosecutor who hadn't even been born when I went to trial. David was waiting outside the gates. He drove me to a hotel he'd paid for, gave me a packet of information about reintegration resources, victim compensation, legal aid for rebuilding my life. He told me Amanda had been arrested the day before, that she'd tried to run, actually, gotten as far as the airport before federal marshals caught her. The evidence was overwhelming now. The shell companies, the fabricated client, the financial motive. The blood spatter analysis that proved the murder weapon was still missing, which meant Amanda had kept it or disposed of it, which meant premeditation. Her entire testimony had been revealed as perjury. She was facing murder charges, conspiracy, fraud, obstruction of justice. David told me all of this in the hotel lobby, and I felt nothing. 17 years is a long time to feel nothing. He left me there, said he'd check in tomorrow, said to call him if I needed anything. I went upstairs to a room with a bed that was too soft and a television that had too many channels and a window that looked out at a city I didn't recognize anymore. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in a chair and watched the sky change from dark to gray to light, and I thought about Amanda Reese sitting in a cell just like mine, realizing what the next 25 years would feel like. It should have felt like justice. It didn't feel like anything. I started rebuilding slowly. David connected me with a victim compensation fund that gave me enough money to rent a small apartment, buy clothes, buy a laptop. I couldn't work as a forensic accountant anymore. My certifications had lapsed, and no one wanted to hire someone who'd been convicted of murder, even if the conviction was overturned. But I could do bookkeeping, small business accounting, freelance work that didn't require explanations. I learned to use a smartphone. I learned to navigate websites that hadn't existed when I went to prison. I learned to tolerate grocery stores and restaurants and public spaces where people moved too fast and talked too loud. I followed Amanda's trial remotely, reading transcripts online, watching news coverage that never mentioned my name. She was convicted on all counts. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. She got life without parole. People told me I should feel vindicated. But vindication is just another word for having your stolen years acknowledged, not returned. What interested me more was what David found while building Amanda's case. The paper trail of her life after Marcus died. She'd started her consulting firm in Chicago 18 months after my conviction, with startup capital that came from an offshore account connected to Heron Capital. She'd grown the business aggressively, taking on high-profile clients, building a reputation as someone who could find fraud and corruption inside any organization. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. But what David found in her client files, shared with me because I was technically entitled to discovery materials related to my exoneration, was more interesting than her success. Amanda had enemies. She'd made them the same way she'd made her fortune, by being ruthless and efficient and willing to cross lines other people wouldn't cross. She'd burned business partners, undercut competitors, stolen clients, fabricated evidence in civil cases. She'd built her empire on the same foundation of lies she'd used to bury me. And people remembered. I didn't contact any of them directly. I didn't have to. I just compiled a very thorough, very detailed document outlining everything David had found about Amanda's business practices, her shell companies, her financial misconduct, her history of perjury. I included references to court documents, financial filings, testimony transcripts. I made it clear, well-sourced, and completely factual. And then I sent it anonymously to 12 journalists, 3 federal prosecutors, and 9 of Amanda's former business associates, who I knew had reasons to want her legacy destroyed. I didn't sign it. I didn't editorialize. I just provided the truth, organized and accessible to people who would know what to do with it. It took 3 weeks for the first article to publish. Disgraced consultant's empire built on fraud and murder. Then another. Then another. The federal prosecutors opened an investigation into her business dealings. Her former associates filed civil suits. Her clients terminated their contracts. By the time Amanda went to prison, there was nothing left of the life she'd built with my stolen years. Her consulting firm dissolved. Her assets were frozen pending litigation. Her name became synonymous with fraud and murder. Every article about her mentioned me. The woman she'd framed, the woman whose life she'd destroyed to cover her own crimes. I didn't testify at her sentencing. I didn't give victim impact statements. I didn't speak to the press. I just existed, quietly, in the small life I was rebuilding, and watched her empire collapse the same way mine had, except hers deserved it. David called me one evening, a year after my release. He said Amanda had tried to appeal her conviction. The appeal had been denied. She'd sent a letter requesting to meet with me, which he'd declined on my behalf unless I wanted to see her. I didn't. There was nothing she could say that would matter. No apology that would give me back 17 years. No explanation that would make sense of what she'd done. She'd made a choice to kill Marcus and frame me, and now she was living with the consequences of that choice. Just like I was living with the consequences. The difference was, I could walk outside whenever I wanted. I started volunteering with the Midwest Innocence Initiative a few months after that. I didn't work on cases directly. I wasn't qualified for that. But I helped with administrative work, filing, organizing evidence logs. It felt right, helping other people trapped in the system that had trapped me. David told me I didn't have to, that I'd already been through enough. But I told him the truth, which was that I needed something to do that meant something. I needed to feel like the years I'd lost hadn't just been erased, but transformed into something that could help someone else. I met other exonerees through the organization. People who'd lost decades to wrongful convictions, who'd been released into a world that had moved on without them. We didn't talk much about our cases. We talked about the strange things instead. How loud cars were now. How many choices there were in a grocery store. How hard it was to sleep without noise. We talked about the empty spaces where our lives should have been. One woman told me she'd been inside for 23 years for a murder her boyfriend committed. She was 56 when she got out. She said the hardest part wasn't being angry at him, it was realizing she'd never be young again. She'd never have children. She'd never have the career she'd planned. She'd never get back the version of herself that existed before. I understood that. I was 52 now. I'd gone into prison at 35, and those years between were supposed to be the ones where I built something lasting. A family, maybe. A home. A legacy. Instead, I'd built survival skills and scar tissue. But I was out. And Amanda wasn't. And every morning when I woke up in my small apartment and made coffee and looked out the window at the street below, I thought about her waking up in a cell just like the one I'd had, staring at concrete walls, counting the years she had left. That was justice. Not the verdict, not the conviction, not the articles or the lawsuits or the empire collapsing. Just the simple, quiet truth that she was living the life she'd condemned me to, and I was free. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks about me. If she lies awake at night in that cell and remembers my face across the courtroom, listening to her testimony, believing that someone would see through it. If she regrets framing me instead of just disappearing after she killed Marcus. If she understands that it was her own meticulous cruelty that left the evidence trail David needed to find her. Probably not. People like Amanda don't think that way. They think about what they lost, not what they took. But I don't spend much time wondering anymore. I've learned to live in the present tense, in the small moments that make up a day. The taste of real coffee, the feeling of rain, the choice to go left instead of right when I'm walking, just because I can. These are the things they can't take from you, and they're the things that matter when everything else is gone. I'm building a life now. It's smaller than the one I had before, quieter, but it's mine. I have work that means something. I have people who know my story and don't look at me differently because of it. I have time, which is the only thing that matters when you've had it stolen. And somewhere, in a prison I'll never visit, Amanda Reese has nothing but time too. That's not revenge. Revenge would have required me to do something, to take action, to make her suffer beyond what the system already made inevitable once the truth came out. This is just consequence. The natural, unavoidable result of her choices catching up with her, the same way gravity catches everything that falls. I didn't push her. I just stepped aside and let her hit the ground. And I'm still here, standing, watching the sky change colors like it does every evening, like it did every evening I couldn't see it, like it will keep doing long after both of us are gone. That's all justice ever really is. Outlasting the people who tried to bury you and making sure they know you're still here when their walls finally close in. I'm still here, and that's enough.